A few years ago, I read a book written by a man who had transformed a restaurant from a struggling two-star restaurant into one of the most renowned restaurants in the world. The book is called Unreasonable Hospitality. Maybe you have heard of it, by Will Guidara. Will Guidara tells the story of taking over a restaurant called 11 Madison Park. And at the time he took it over, it was a two-star struggling restaurant. But by the time he and his partners were done with this restaurant, it was a 4-star New York Times restaurant, had 3 Michelin stars, and had won the award for the best restaurant in the world. What set them apart was not just their food. Of course, their food was exceptional. But it was the experience that they offered to everyone who graced their restaurant. They were known for over-the-top, out-of-this-world, thoughtful touches for their guests, so that when their guests left, they felt seen and heard, and they had a memory that would last a lifetime. One of the most notable stories that Guidara tells in his book has to do with a hot dog. There was a family visiting New York City, dining at 11 Madison Park at the end of their New York City vacation, and they were bemoaning the fact that they were having a very fancy dinner, but they had neglected in their entire time in New York City to have a traditional New York City hot dog. Well, the waiter overheard them talking about this, and so the waiter went to the kitchen, and then the kitchen staff went out to a hot dog cart outside of the restaurant, bought several New York City hot dogs, gave them the 5-star treatment, and then served it to the family and said, "Here, now you can say you've had a New York City hot dog." That was the kind of thing that they were known for, and that's what Guidara calls unreasonable hospitality. Now, I bring that up because today we're closing out our teaching series called Summer Shorts, and we're looking at 2 books, 2 John and 3 John, 3 John being the shortest book in the Bible. But there is a theme that binds these 2 very short books together, and the theme is hospitality. What John is talking about is hospitality, the hospitality that Christians should and should not show to certain people. The big idea of these 2 books is this. You could summarize all of it by saying this, that Christians are to be unreasonably inhospitable to lies, but great hosts to the truth. Followers of Jesus should be inhospitable to lies and great hosts to the truth. A little bit of context to what's going on in 2 and 3 John. John, the same apostle and the disciple who wrote the Gospel of John, is writing letters to the early church to encourage them. At this particular moment in time, the church is growing very fast. It's blowing up, it's going viral, but it's not going viral because of social media, that doesn't exist yet, or because of mass print communication, that does not exist yet. It's blowing up, it's growing like crazy because there are preachers and evangelists carrying the message of Jesus, walking from town to town, taking up residence in these towns and villages, and calling people to faith in Jesus. And essential to this is them finding people who already know Jesus or who are very open to the message of Jesus, finding people who fit that bill and lodging with them, receiving food and care and shelter from them so that they can stick around in that town over the course of days, weeks, maybe even months and teach about Jesus. That's how the movement is growing. But there's another movement that's growing in a very similar way. And it's kind of a play or a take on the Christian movement. We would call it a heresy, a false teaching. There's a group of people known as the Gnostics, Gnostics, from the Greek word gnosis, which means knowledge, a group of people called the Gnostics who are teaching a false version of the gospel. They rejected the idea that Jesus had come in flesh. They rejected the idea that Jesus was not just fully God, but also fully man, that he lived and he died and he rose again in the flesh. They rejected that idea and they claimed to have special knowledge. That's where their name, Gnostics, come from, that reveal that Jesus was really just kind of a powerful deity spirit floating over the world, sharing his message of forgiveness, but that he really didn't come in the flesh. And these people peddling this false version of Christianity, they were also hopping from village to village trying to share their message, also dependent upon the hospitality of people welcoming them in and giving them food and lodging and support. And so John sees all this happening. The Christian message going out, needing people to support it with their hospitality, and this false message going out, being supported by people's hospitality. And that's why John is writing these two letters. So now let's dive in even deeper and see what this has to tell us about our lives as followers of Jesus today. Jump with me back to 2 John, starting at verse 5. We're going to break this apart just a little bit, zoom in deep, do basically a little bit of Bible study here. I encourage you to follow along with me either on the screen or on your device. Let's see, there we go. We're all set up. So we're going to start at verse 5. Let's see what this has to say to us. John says this, "And now, dear lady, I am not writing you a new command, but one that we have had from the beginning." Dear lady is a reference not to a particular person, but to the church. "I'm writing you a new command, but one that we have had from the beginning. I ask that we love one another." Remember, this is John who also wrote John's gospel. And in John's gospel, in particular in chapter 13 and in chapter 14, you're going to see words like command and you're going to see words like love, but they're coming from Jesus. Jesus in John chapter 13 and John chapter 14 says, "If you love me, you will obey my commands." And Jesus himself says, "I give a new command to you, love one another." So John here is very clearly referencing his own quotations of Jesus in the gospel that he shared with the church. "And this is love," he says, "that we walk in obedience to his commands." So John is tying love with obedience. "As you have heard from the beginning, his command is that you walk in love." So John starts his letter by saying, remember, we've been commanded to walk in love, and love looks like obedience. Now, what does this mean? John is about to ask these early Christians to do a very difficult thing. And so he starts by reminding them of what true love looks like. And he says that love bears fruit in a willingness to do difficult things. So before he tells them the difficult thing he's going to ask them to do, he says, remember, we're called to love, and love often looks like obedience to doing something difficult. And remember, these words do come not just from me, but they come from Jesus. And that's the first point I want to remind us of, is that true love bears the fruit of willfully embracing difficulty. When you love someone, it not only changes how you feel, it changes what you do. It changes how you act. It makes you willing to and capable of doing things that you might otherwise avoid if you didn't love this particular person. Guys, you experienced this when you started to get serious with the person who would eventually become your wife. When you got serious with her and you started to feel feelings of love for her, stuff started to change, didn't it? Not just feelings of love, but the way in which you actually lived your life started to change. Maybe you started to dress a little differently, care a little more about how you carried yourself. Maybe you decorated your apartment differently based on her loving critique. Or you started to spend your weekends differently, your free time differently, meaning you no longer had any free time that didn't involve her. Things started to change. And it changed not just because you wanted to keep her around and make her happy. It changed. You started to do different things because you actually loved her. And that's what love does. Love ultimately bears fruit in a new obedience. Now, for followers of Jesus, the love that we have for Jesus, the love that we have for God in Christ Jesus, bears a particular type of obedience. It is obedience to God and truthfulness to others. For followers of Jesus, the difficulty that we become willing to embrace out of love for God is obedience to God when it's hard, when he asks us to do hard things, and then speaking the truth in love to our neighbor. And this is what John is going to be asking these early Christians to do. But this is true for you and me. Out of love for God, we seek to obey God and speak truthfully to our neighbor. Think, for example, of a young doctor who is also a follower of Jesus. And she, who loves the Lord and loves her patients, out of obedience to God, will show up to the hospital to give her best, to serve the best that she can, even and especially on days when she doesn't feel like it. I've still got to show up and be the best doctor I can, because that's what my God asks of me, and I love him, so I'm going to be obedient. Even when I don't feel like being much of an MD today, I'm going to show up and be the best doctor I possibly can. Because I love my God, I'm going to be obedient to the calling that he's given me, show up and give my best. But then also because I love my neighbor, and in this case, my neighbor is my patients that I'm called to serve, I'm going to embrace the difficulty of speaking difficult truth to them. When I have to give them a very difficult diagnosis, maybe even some tragic or heartbreaking news, I'm not gonna hold back. I'm gonna say the thing that they don't wanna hear, that they need to know. Because why? Because I love them. Because love often means doing the difficult thing, and in this case, speaking a difficult truth. Love is a new obedience to God, truth to others. John is reminding them of this. He's setting them up for the difficult thing he's about to ask them to do, okay? Let's continue. Looking now at verses 7 through 9. John says, I say all of this because many deceivers who do not acknowledge Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh. So these are those Gnostic believers who believe they have this special insight that Jesus never really showed up in flesh and blood, have gone out into the world. This is his way of saying, they're coming to your town. Be on the lookout. This word for deceiver can also be translated as pretender. They are pretend believers, John says. Or since I grew up in the 80s and 90s, you could call them posers. Any such person is the deceiver and the antichrist. When John says any such person who denies that Jesus Christ came in the flesh is the deceiver, what he's saying is they are the devil. These are strong words. Wow. And the antichrist. Strong words. Now here, antichrist is not a person, but an antichrist is a posture. It's a belief. Those who reject the revelation of Jesus as fully God and fully man, they are the antichrist. That's what John is saying. So he is using incredibly strong language here. This is not just some minute, unnecessary doctrine. This is essential. Those who tell you Jesus didn't come in the flesh, they are satanic and antichrist. Watch out that you do not lose what we have worked for. And what we've worked for is your faith and your salvation. He's saying, look, the stakes are high here. If you reject the truth of who Jesus really is, you reject Jesus. Anyone who runs ahead and does not continue in the teaching of Christ does not have God. This running ahead here could also be translated as progresses. This is an attack on those who say, I know more than what Jesus has taught. They seek to progress beyond, run beyond what Jesus has actually revealed. And John is saying, focus on what Jesus said about himself, fully God, fully man. These people who claim to have special knowledge, they are running ahead and they are running past God. They don't have him. Whoever continues in the teaching that Jesus is God has both Father and the Son. Both Father and the Son. Wow. So, again, John is preparing to make this big, difficult ask of God's people. So now he's presenting to them the problem that he's going to have them confront. He's preparing them for the ask by telling them that there are attacks on the truth of who Jesus is all around them. Quite literally, they were attacks on the truth of who Jesus is, that he really lived, really died, and really rose, about to knock on their door and ask for their help. And he's trying to make it clear that these are not simply misinformed brothers in the faith or just a little off, but otherwise very chill. He's telling them, look, These people are a threat to your faith and to the mission. There are attacks on the truth that are knocking at your door. Now, the question I have as I read this is John's warning for this early church, is it still relevant for followers of Jesus today? Are there attacks on the truth of who Jesus is that are a threat to my faith, that are knocking on my proverbial door and yours? And the answer to that is absolutely there are. There are endless false teachings and phony religions and misrepresentations of the gospel knocking on our doors and asking us to take them in. It's rarely our literal front door. You know what it is these days? It's our digital front door. It's that device you have in your pocket. It's the tablet that's always sitting in your son's lap. It's media. It's the content that we are consuming, none of which, and I hope you know this, none of which is neutral. Even the stuff that's just silly and stupid, none of it is neutral. Every single thing that we watch, from the profane to the profound, it has an agenda, it has a perspective, it has a worldview, it has a belief set that it is subtly, if not explicitly, through our consumption and our accommodation of it, asking us to welcome it into our home. Welcome it into our home and into our hearts and into our minds. And yes, a lot of it is kind of petty and inconsequential. We really like silly dog videos in our house. But some of it is overt in the fact that it has a very different view of the divine, a very different way of seeing the world, a totally different set of morals and values. Did you know that some of the very same false teachings that the New Testament was railing against, and that our creeds that we recite on a weekly basis were articulated to protect ourselves from, that some of those very same, the fancy word is heresies, are alive and well today? For example, in the Mormon church, in Jehovah's Witness theology, you have two heresies from the first century that are alive and well today about rejecting the full divinity of Jesus, rejecting the gospel of grace alone, and more. But you also have just the ideas of our age, the false gods of our time. And I'm not the kind of pastor, you know me by now, I'm not the kind of pastor who says, man, be afraid of the world. I'm not very afraid of the world because I know Christ is king of the world, but I want to be sober-minded and clear-eyed, right? That there are other things out there knocking on the door of our hearts and our home, asking for our hearts and asking to be supported by our home. So again, for example, what you see in our day and age, you know what I see is one of the great enemies of God's truth that's knocking on our doors constantly? And it's the great worldview of our age, and it's the idea that all morality, all truth is relative. Relativism. The idea that truth is subjective. That no one can really know what the truth is, therefore you can't tell me your truth, and I can't tell you mine. And there's a boundary line between me and you where I get my truth and my version of reality and you get yours. And we all get to live happy so long as I don't ever try to take my truth into your little bubble or yours into mine. And that is one of the most divisive, corrosive, demonic ideas that our world, that humanity has ever known. It's a message preached by the masses, and it is dangerous. And it's dangerous for a number of reasons, but I'll give you two. Number one, it keeps me from truly loving you, especially when love requires me to speak the truth to you, to protect you, to help you, to save you. But in a world of moral relativism, I can never speak the truth to you because no one has the truth, and so I have to keep my mouth shut and let you do what you want, even if what you're wanting to do is crash right into a brick wall, because you'd rather crash into that brick wall than have me step on your freedom by telling you what I think is true. It also takes all of the necessity out of sharing our faith. If all truth and all gods are equal, then there's no need for me to share my truth or my God with you. In John's view, there are all kinds of lies and awful ideas knocking at literal doors, wanting support, wanting to harbor in your home, wanting to be held onto with your hearts. And that is still true to this day. There's lots of things pounding at the door, asking to make its home in yours. And so now, here comes John's big, difficult ask that he's gonna make. Look at verses 10 and 11. He says, if anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching being Jesus is God, and he is both God and man. If anyone comes to you and he does not bring this teaching, here's the difficult thing. Do not take them into your house or welcome them. I want you to be inhospitable to people who preach and teach lies. Shut the door. Anyone who welcomes them shares in their wicked work. What's interesting to me is this word that's translated as shares is the same word that is translated as fellowship, koinonia. Anyone who welcomes them, anyone who harbors them, is having fellowship with their wicked work, which is denying people the truth of who Jesus actually is. These are strong words, and this is where John makes his difficult ask of God's people. Don't show any hospitality to those who peddle destructive lies. If you do, and this is some strong coffee, you are culpable in their wickedness. The big idea is this: be inhospitable to lies when they're knocking at your door. That's what John is saying. Be inhospitable to lies when they're knocking at your door. And this is hard because we're always taught and we're told that we're supposed to be what? We're supposed to be nice. If somebody comes to us in need, I can't shut the door in their face. I'm supposed to open the door wide and share everything that I have. I'm supposed to be nice. I'm supposed to be kind. And after all, I want to be liked. Don't you want to be liked? But here's what John says. There's going to be people who knock at your door and they seem benign, they seem beautiful, they seem nice, but they are peddling lies. And here's what you have to do. You have to shut the door in their face. Because their lies are dangerous. So what does this look like for you and me? If this is application for us, what does this look like for you and me? Man. Well, let me be clear. I don't think this means that we get to be rude or cruel to people who believe or live differently than us, not at all. I'm not saying that you can't be friends or close to people who see the world in a way that is opposed to the scriptures. I don't think that's true. Or that you should just construct some kind of Christian bubble where you only scroll sermon clips or listen to Forrest Frank. I don't think that's the answer. You know what I think it means? I think it means this. John talks about being aware. And another way to translate that word of being aware is to stand guard. How I think this applies to us today is we should stand guard over our hearts and our home. I think it's a posture of sobriety, of attention, and of readiness. Sobriety meaning that you are honest about reality and you are not naive. You realize that there are things out there that can be corrosive and can corrupt your own heart and your home. And you realize that everything in some way, big or small, is trying to influence you and that it's not all good. You stand at attention in the sense that you're not just passively taking in people and content and ideas, but as you welcome people into your life, as you scroll through content, you're taking note of what it believes, what it teaches, how it sees the world. And then there's readiness. You are prepared to speak up if you need to speak up and step up to clarify with your family, hey, I know they're doing this, but that's not what we do. Or I know that this is teaching that, but that's not what we believe. I know that they condone that, but that's not what we condone. If you need to speak up and bring that kind of clarity and delineate the difference between the truth and the lies, you're willing to. It means you're willing to block certain content out on the iPad, to unsubscribe, to unfollow, to draw a boundary line, realizing that things are knocking, but they don't necessarily have to get in. I'm not saying you have to ditch it all. We don't live in fear. We live in freedom in Jesus, but we do need to be discerning about it all. And that's what John is saying. Rather than sitting back with the door wide open, just letting stuff in, realizing it's not neutral, man. You got to stand guard and mind the door. That's John's ask of the church in the first century, and I think that ask still applies to us today. How are you doing at minding the door? Are you being too hospitable to ideas and worldviews and beliefs that claim to be benign, but you know are in fact actively influencing, molding, shaping, should I use the word discipling, you and your kids? Now we get to 3 John. And John changes his tune just a little bit. In fact, he goes from telling Christian people not to be hospitable to lies to telling them and commending a man named Gaius for being hospitable to the truth. Look with me starting at verse 5 of 3 John. John is writing to Gaius, and he's commending him for his willingness to be extremely hospitable to those who are sharing the gospel. He says, "Beloved," or dear friend, "you are faithful in what you are doing for the brothers and the sisters." This word faithful is the kind of verb that implies ongoing action. So this is what Gaius is known for. He's the kind of person that has been, is, and will be faithful in welcoming believers into his home, even though they are strangers to you. He's showing unreasonable hospitality to those who are sharing the true message of Jesus. They have told the church about your love. Please send them on their way in a manner that honors God. It was for the sake of the name that they went out preaching, receiving no help from the pagans. This is important. John here, by saying the name as a reference to Jesus, is recognizing that Jesus is God. Observant Jews at this particular time thought the name of God in Hebrew, Yahweh, was too holy to utter. And so they would say simply the name in reference to God. John here is showing Jesus the same deference, not saying his actual name, but instead saying the name, just as an observant Jew would about God. So he's implying that Jesus is what? God. These preachers went out receiving no help from the pagans. The false teachers would ask for money from the people they were trying to convert. John is making the point that these evangelists went out and they didn't ask any money from the people they were trying to convert, which means Gaius's support was that much more important. They weren't going out to non-believers saying, "Hey, I'll tell you about Jesus and then give me $5. They were saying, "We're going to tell you about Jesus, ask nothing in return," and trusting that the people of Jesus are going to support us and meet our needs. We ought, therefore, to show hospitality to such people so that we may work together for the truth. Keep showing hospitality to those who share the name of Jesus. So on the flip side, while John says, be utterly inhospitable to lies, he commends Gaius for opening his home to those who are preaching the truth. And that's another point for us today. Followers of Jesus, those who consider themselves Christian, should go out of their way to do whatever they can to support the sharing of God's truth, to be good hosts for God's truth, because this is how the kingdom expands. This is how Jesus' fame increases. This is how the gospel gets out. It's not merely by Christian pastors and Christian evangelists going from town to town. It's Christian people welcoming this truth into their homes and into their hearts and supporting it with their lives. We are to be incredibly hospitable, unreasonably hospitable to the truth, so that this truth can spread and can grow and more people can be blessed by it. Now, practically speaking, what does that look like? What does it mean to be hospitable to the truth of Jesus? It gets lived out in a number of ways. I got three: sharing, supporting, and abiding. And that last word, abiding, is one that John uses a lot. Sharing, as in sharing this truth with the most important people in your lives, in particular, those who are in that house with you. Your kids, your spouse, yourself. Supporting it, meaning giving your most prized resources to mobilize it. The resources of money and time. You're opening up your own fridge to feed it. And then abiding in it, making space to learn it and be shaped by it more than any other influence in your life. That's how we are unreasonably hospitable to God's truth. We bring it into our home, we share it with our most important people, we open the fridge and we feed it with our resources, and then we pay attention to it. We set up shop with it in the living room and we let it influence us. It's not easy. That's why John had to talk about love, obedience, and truth right at the beginning. It's hard, but it's worth it once you see the way this truth transforms the home that hosts it. So here's a question worth wrestling with. How hospitable is my home to the truth? Is my home hospitable to God's truth? Am I sharing it with my most important people? Am I supporting it from my fridge? Am I giving it attention in the living room of my life? Am I more hospitable to the lies than I am to the love of God in Jesus Christ? That's the question. You know, there's an irony at work in all of this. All this talk about being hospitable. The true good news, the capital T truth that we're trying to protect and prioritize, at the heart of it is an indescribable act of inhospitality. What we believe and what the Gnostics rejected is that God came to earth in the flesh, and that in the flesh we rejected him, we disowned him, we abused him, we killed him. And yet Jesus did all this, embraced it for a purpose, to save the world. What we believe is that Jesus embraced the greatest inhospitality from the world so that through his death and resurrection, he could make the world hospitable to him, so that he could welcome the world into his home. By being rejected, condemned, and killed in our home, he earned forgiveness and welcomes you, unreasonable as that sounds, fully and completely into his. So that now, whenever you come into God's house, gather around his gifts, hear his word, whenever you cry out to the Father in prayer, all you get in return is the Father looking at you saying, hey, welcome home. What's mine is yours. Jesus experienced the greatest inhospitality in our home so that we might be fully and completely welcomed into his. That's the irony at the center of all this talk of hospitality. In his book, Gadara talks about that story of the hot dog and what it taught his team. He said that what they learned from that hot dog incident was that you didn't need $500 entrees or grand acts of service in order to change somebody's life and leave an impression and to make them feel profoundly seen and heard. He said what they learned was this: all you have to do is pay attention. Pay attention to what people say, to what people do, and then respond. John's call for us is the same. He's calling Christians back then and today to pay attention. Pay attention to what's knocking at your door. What's asking for your heart, what's asking for your home, because not all of it is good. Close the door on that which is corrosive and destructive. Throw the door wide open to that which is true and life-giving in Jesus Christ. Friends, may I just be so bold as to say that some of us have become far too complacent with corrosive, corrupt, perhaps in some cases even evil influences, and cold to the truth. May that not be the case. stand guard at your door. Watch what wants in. And when it's the truth of Jesus, throw the doors wide open. Amen.